Whitetails and Agronomy with Wes Steele from DIY Food Plot Pro. Wes has over 25 years experience in commercial ag production, food plots, a Bachelor of Science in Agronomy, and owns and operates a deer hunting outfitter business in western Kentucky. Follow along as Wes discusses proven food plot strategies, habitat enhancements, and how to manage a deer herd to produce higher quality bucks on your farm.
Welcome, everybody. This is episode 1 of Whitetails and Agronomy. I am your host, Wes Steele. The reason that I started this podcast was because I saw so much misinformation online referring to food plots, soil fertilization, soil acidity. Anywhere that I went, whether it was Facebook or YouTube or any of the other platforms, I was seeing information that was either misleading or was just not true in general. So it made me start my YouTube channel 2 or 3 years ago, and I think I really got a lot of traction with that because many folks looked to me because they knew that I was telling them the truth. I didn't have any big sponsors, and I was just being honest with people. And I think that really resonated with people. And so I've started kind of doing the YouTube, and then I've also switched into doing a lot of consultations in the wintertime, helping people set up their food plots and their farms for whitetail deer hunting. So one of the guys that I went to see this past winter reached out to me last week and said, "Man, I think you need to do a podcast." He's a great guy, very intelligent guy, and I've always been one of those types that I think you surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, and you'll succeed. And he told me, he said, "You need to start a podcast," and I believe the podcast will do really well. Here is my shot at starting this podcast. I hope you enjoy it. This is episode 1 of Whitetails and Agronomy. Today we're going to talk about soil acidity and how that pertains to food plots. Now, there is a ton of information online, and we're going to go through all this. This will take a pretty good while because this is a lot to wrap your head around, all the information that's about to come forth. In essence, if your soil pH is off, whether it's too high or too low, you can 100% guarantee that your food plots are not going to be as productive as what they were if the soil was at a perfect or optimum soil pH. So we're going to get into later how that affects the plants and how that affects the different food plots that we raise for whitetails. But in essence, when we are providing food for whitetails, we are trying to provide those whitetails with the most nutrition-packed food that we possibly can. And in order for us to do that, the soil pH must be in an optimum range. And I'm going to explain all this in detail in a few minutes, but it's very critical that soil pH is in an optimum range where those nutrients are available to those crops. So, is soil pH really a big deal? I get asked this a ton when I'm going around consulting or whether it's on the YouTube channel. How big of a deal is soil acidity? It's really a pretty big deal. So basically what it amounts to is there's a scale. There's many different nutrients that all crops need. Some are macros and some are micros. So some of the ones that you've likely heard of are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Some of the ones that you might not have heard of are boron and zinc and things like that. So all these nutrients have a sweet spot. Okay, so think of it as a scale, and all these nutrients that are on this scale. And as the soil pH gets less and less and less, there are certain nutrients that are much more available to those plants at a lower pH, and there are certain nutrients that are much less available. So you kind of consider it like it's being locked down. It's locked away. If you're running like, say, 4 to 5 soil pH, your 3 macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, are very much limited to that plant. They cannot get as much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium as that plant needs because of that soil pH has that availability locked down. The macronutrients are nutrients that are needed in large quantities. So That's obviously your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and potassium. Those three are the ones that you always hear about. The micronutrients are oftentimes only needed in very, very small quantities. So if you take a soil test, you might see zinc or boron, and it might say that it's low in the soil, and you look down at the recommended rate to fix that, and it might only be 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds. So it takes very little of the micronutrients, but plants do still require those micronutrients in the soil for them to be as healthy as what they possibly can. So when your soil pH is low, you have things like aluminum and manganese that are much more available to those plants at that lower soil pH. And this is a bad deal because it can lead to toxicity in our plants. There's many different deficiencies and toxicities that we have when we're trying to raise our food plots. And more than likely, you've seen every single one of these in the field, whether it's a yellowing of, say, cereal grains or sunflowers or corn. That's a nitrogen deficiency. Very easily visible in the field. You go out there and you don't have that dark green, pretty plant look. You have a light green, ugly color. That's a nitrogen deficiency all day long. So that's something that's very easy for folks to see as they go out into their plots. Generally, like say a cereal grain plot that you plant in the fall for whitetails, generally you will see that nitrogen deficiency play out in wintertime because that nitrogen leaches through the soil and it runs out of nitrogen, and your plants were dark green, and then now all of a sudden they've started changing colors to a lighter color green. That's how you know that you're not putting enough nitrogen on that cereal grain crop. High soil pH can be equally as a problem as low soil pH. There, on this scale that we talk about, there is nutrients that get locked away when the soil pH goes over 8. Nitrogen and phosphorus both, when it gets up much higher than 8, they will drop off rapidly. So whether you have low or high, you are limiting your nutrients that are available to your plant. So I get this question a lot, and they say, well, you know what? I'm just going to throw more fertilizer out there. That's not really how it all works. If those nutrients are not available to the plant, it doesn't matter how many pounds of fertilizer you can put out there, it's not going to uptake that. So it doesn't really matter on that side of things. That's not really a good statement to say because it doesn't work that way. It works by when the soil pH is in the correct range, it will uptake the amount of nutrients that it needs that are in the soil to raise the best quality of crop that it can for the rainfall that it's got. So if you can only afford lime or fertilizer and you have highly acidic soil, which one should you put? This is 100% a lime, no question about it. Now, it's going to limit us on some of the food plots that we can plant. Don't recommend planting something like corn or sunflowers that needs a high rate of fertilizer if you're working on just putting lime down for this year and changing your soil pH. There's many other options that really work well in that case, such as clover and cereal grains work really, really easily and really can be grown in a very wide variety of soil types and soil pH. So what is the sweet spot for soil pH? So we know too low is a bad deal, too high is a bad deal. Where do we really want to be? Anywhere from, I would say, 6 to 7 is perfect. Generally, 6.5 to 7 is considered ideal. That's neutral. So that's going to be the very best that you can possibly have spread across that entire scale, right? Because it boils down to all those nutrients and how they get uptook from the soil. So there's going to be some that at a 6.5 are still going to be a little bit more limited, but in general, we're kind of following the middle of the road here. 6.5 to 7 is considered the very best for raising most plots. Now, I don't get too worried about liming until I start seeing soil pHs drop down in below 5.5, 5.6. That's when I really start like, okay, I'm going to have to get some lime on that field. You can see this in the fields very, very easily on soils that do not have the soil pH and the farm next door does have the correct pH. You can see this is a visual difference that you will see. So what is soil acidity, right? What is the very definition of soil acidity? And soil acidity is a large amount of hydrogen ions in your soil. That's the very definition of it. Basically, what that means is that large amount of hydrogen ions in the soil makes soil more acidic. So soil that's say 4.0 has many more hydrogen ions in the soil than a soil of say 7.5. So what causes soil acidity? One of the biggest things that causes soil acidity, other than just natural soil pH, is high synthetic fertilizers. These are in the form of nitrogen, and they are for those crops that require a heavy dose of nitrogen, something like corn or sunflowers. When we're putting 170, 180 pounds of nitrogen down per acre for our corn food plots, we're putting a significant amount of synthetic fertilizer on that land. And that brings the soil pH down because that synthetic fertilizer is made of ammonia and it is highly acidic. Okay, so it adds more hydrogen ions into that soil. Generally, you're going to see a little bit of a pH drop every year. Some places that you will not, if you're at a natural soil pH or you're raising things like clover and things like that that don't have a significant amount of synthetic fertilizers applied to it. But things like corn and sunflowers, if those are in your rotations, you're going to see a drop every year in that soil pH. And that's why I encourage all my consulting clients to keep a book of soil pH to where we can look at this and we can say, okay, the soil's dropping by about 0.5 points per year. So we know that if we start out at 7, by the third year, we're going to be needing to add some lime. We're going to be down in that 5.5 range, okay? And then we're going to be good for another three or four more years. So since I tell all my consulting clients to take these soil samples every year, I get asked a ton is, where do I take these soil samples at? And are these cheap ones available at the most farm stores? Are they just as good? I generally try to shy away from those. I really want something that's going to a lab. I don't want something that we're doing ourselves that's sit on the shelves for who knows how long. I'm not bashing those products by any means, but I feel much more comfortable with a soil sample that's getting sent into a lab that sends you the recommendation back rather than those soil tests that are in the store. So where do you take these soil tests to get these done? Most of your university extension offices in almost every state has these, and they'll have an extension office in your county, and you can take your soil up there. Generally, I think it's $10 or $15 per soil sample. It's not really significant, and they will get you the results of what crops that you planted last year, what crops you're going to plant this year. Then you will have a graph of all your macros and all your micronutrients. And then also at the bottom, many times you'll have a graph that says this is a recommended rate for the following year. So it's a very handy piece of information to have. One really important note to mention is nitrogen will not be listed on that list. And the reason that nitrogen is not listed on that list is because nitrogen doesn't really stay in the soil. It leaches out pretty quickly. So phosphorus and potassium, we can put that down on our soils and it will stay there. But nitrogen really doesn't. It will leach away. It will disappear in the soil pretty quickly. So if you put all your corn fertilizer down, and let's say we're going to put 170 to 180 pounds of nitrogen down, within 2 or 3 months, most of that nitrogen is going to be gone. So it's something that we need to be aware of, but that's the reason that you're not going to see nitrogen on those soil tests, because it leaches away and it does not stay in the soil like a lot of the other nutrients. Okay, now that we know about soil acidity and what causes it, let's find out how to fix it. There's 4 main products that are marketed towards food plotters, and today we're going to go over all 4 of these products. I'm going to give you all the details that are involved with these products, because there is a lot of marketing here, and there is a lot of big dogs on YouTube and on Facebook that push a lot of these products that are not helping food plotters one bit at all. Today we're going to go through them, and I'm going to teach you exactly what to look for in these products when you are in the store trying to buy them, and what to absolutely avoid at all costs. So the 4 main products that we have are liquid lime calcium carbonate, pelleted lime, ag lime, and calcium chloride liquid lime. All forms of calcium, right? That's the common misconception in food plotting is, well, they all have calcium in them, so calcium must be the agent that neutralizes the soil acidity, right? No, that's not right at all. They do all have calcium in there, but calcium does not have anything to do with that chemical reaction to lower the number of hydrogen ions in the soil. Remember, the more hydrogen ions in that soil, the more acidic the soil. So if we convert those hydrogen ions in the soil into something else, the soil is therefore less acidic. So the carbonate is what actually converts the hydrogen ions, the COOH. So I'm not a college professor here in chemistry, and I'm not going to try to be. I know what I know from my ag degree and through years of farming experience. The carbonate hooks on to that hydrogen ion, and it basically converts it into something else. And so when it does that, it raises the soil pH. Okay, so that reaction happens tons of times in the soil, and as that's happening, your pH is rising. Okay, the number of hydrogen ions are dropping, and your pH is rising. So one of the big things that we need to look at when we are buying any of these liming products is the CCE. And the CCE is the calcium carbonate equivalent. And the definition of that is the measure of how effective a liming material is at neutralizing the soil acidity. So in essence, this all boils down to the higher the CCE, the less liming material needed to raise the soil pH. So in my part of the world, in Western Kentucky, if we get lime from a quarry, ag lime from a quarry, it's going to be around 70% CCE. Okay? And so our soil samples are going to be based off of that number. So for our area, it generally takes 2,000 pounds of agricultural lime to raise the soil pH 1 point at a 70% CCE. Can I use less liming products because I'm not using ag lime? And so we're going to get into that here in just a second. But I wanted to say around 70% CCE is what our quarries run here in where I'm at in Western Kentucky. Let's get to our first product, calcium chloride liquid lime. So this has widely been used by food plotters. I mean, this has been targeted for food plotters for the last several years. And I'm not going to name any companies. I'm not into bashing companies like that. All you have to do is look at the bottle, the jug, and see what the active ingredient is. It's going to be on every single bottle or jug that you buy. And if it says calcium chloride, that has zero effect on soil pH. This was one of the main things that got me to start my YouTube channel. Was I saw a mega influencer, somebody who had hundreds of thousands of followers, pushing this product. I looked up the active ingredient, calcium chloride. I knew it was not helping any of these people at all, zero. But yet he was still continued to push and push and push this product, claiming that it was just doing wonderful things for his soil and it was raising the soil pH, and all basically stuffing his pockets full of cash and leaving his viewers and subscribers out in the cold with same soil pH but less money in their pocket. So why do so many people believe in calcium chloride? The problem of it is that when you put a little bit of this product on an actively growing plant, you're giving it a little boost of calcium. And when you give a plant a little boost of calcium, you will see kind of an uptick in that plant's growth. It makes you kind of think that plant, wow, that plant does look a little bit better today. So maybe it did raise my soil pH. And another thing that's really difficult about soil pH, and when you're looking at any of these products, is how do we accurately determine whether this is actually raising the soil pH or is it just differences in the field? So I actually set up an experiment with these exact products 2 years ago, excuse me. And the problem with this experiment is our soils have so many different pHs throughout the soil. A lot of people think you take one soil sample in your field, it's going to give you a 5.7 pH, and you think, okay, well, I have a 5.7 pH across the field. You spray something on the food plot, and you go out there again 6 months later, and you take a different sample somewhere, and it shows 6.1. And you're like, whoa, holy cow, this stuff really worked. It really worked fast, and this is great. But what a lot of people don't realize is how much this varies across a field, whether that's a big field or a small field. when I do my consulting, I draw out these soil maps for my clients, and I map out every one of these soil types that are on this farm. And people are shocked when I show them that maybe even a 2 or 3 acre plot might have 7 or 8 different soil types in it, right? And so you can have varying degrees of soil pH just because of the soil types alone. But say the soil types are the same, you can still have varying degrees of soil pH throughout that soil. Also, if you're taking your soil sample, I had a guy one time reach out, and he wanted me to push his product. It was a liquid liming product. And he said, we did all the samples, and we took our soil from 5.5 and we raised it to 6.8. And the first question I asked him was, how deep did you take the first sample? And he said, like 3 or 4 inches. How deep did you take the second sample? Oh, it was, a half inch. Well, if you're not comparing to apples, and that's really difficult with this entire experiment, because you can't analyze the exact same soil that you had. You have to do this in a lab for this to really be accurate. So when I look for information on whether these liming agents actually raise the soil pH, I look for university studies where they're doing this in a lab. They're not doing this out in a field. This is not a experiment, in my opinion, that you can do out in a field with varying soil types, with varying soil pHs all the way across this field. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to spray a product on there or even apply a product on there and say that, yeah, my soil pH went up. So we have to really rely on science here and less of ourselves going out and doing experiments. I'm all for doing experiments on food plots in the ground and how to raise better quality plots for my whitetails. I actually have a huge experiment going on right now that episode 2 is going to be talking about, so definitely tune in for that. But I'm comparing tons of different hybrids of corn and soybeans and forage soybeans and sunflowers, so the list goes on and on and on. But I'm all for doing those experiments, but I don't feel like we're getting an accurate experiment when we're doing these liquid lime experiments on our own farm, because we're just not doing it in a lab. So one great example here is when you see farmers using variable rate lime. And it's really wild if you've never seen it before, but they take a side-by-side out through the field and they take soil samples all over this field, right? And then it's plugging in different amounts. So this soil sample over here on the left might have came up with a 5.7, and this soil sample over here on the right may have come up with a 7.0. So it maps all this out, and when they come out to spread, that machine has already decided how much it's putting down in certain locations. And you will literally see areas with a very low soil pH where it's caking it on there. It looks like it snowed on it. And then you will see an area 150 feet or 200 feet from it that the machine literally did not put any lime whatsoever because the soil pH didn't need it right there. So it's just a great example of how we use this and how that experiment is really a tough experiment to do, in my opinion. The second product we're going to talk about is liquid lime calcium carbonate. Now, the carbonate in this is a product that is actually going to change the soil pH. No question about that. It is going to lower the amount of hydrogen ions in the soil. The problem with the calcium carbonate liquid lime is you're not putting very much on. In most cases, you're putting a jug per acre on. And so, I don't know, it's been many years since I put a jug of this stuff on any of my plots. But say, 12, 13 pounds for the jug. And you have to realize that lime doesn't come in a liquid form. So 35 to 50% of that product is water. The remainder of that, so roughly half your weight, is your calcium carbonate. And so what they say is, well, it's ultra fine. And it 100% is. There's no question about it. They run it through mini screens and they get it down as small as what they possibly can. And the reason they do that is so it reacts to the soil very, very quickly. The smaller the liming particle, the faster it will react with the soil. So one thing that we talk a lot about on the YouTube channel is, can we use these liquid limes, calcium carbonate, at a lower rate? Because a lot of these manufacturers will put on the jug, 1 jug equals 2,000 pounds of agricultural lime. I don't see how they're able to put this on on the jug. I don't see how that's not just a bold lie. Like, to me, that is just black and white, simple, that is just 100% a lie. There's no way that it can equal 2,000 pounds of agricultural lime. The weight's not there. Even if it is finer, the weight is not there to support that evidence. So I don't really understand. And the jugs that I actually bought many years ago, from my experience, very much surprising to me, did not say that on the jug. So a lot of people were telling me that. A lot of the information online said that, but actually on the jug did not say 1 jug of this equals 2,000 pounds of ag lime. And I suspect that the reason for that is because it would be false advertisement. Because there's no way that equals 2,000 pounds of agricultural. So can we use less of this product because it has a finer liming material in it? And that goes back to the CCE, guys. That's what this all boils down to. You have to look at that CCE, that calcium carbonate equivalent. So if your CCE is not higher than 70%, or whatever your ag quarries test for in your neck of the woods, you are not going to be able to put less of any product, whether it's liquid or whether it's pelleted, whether it's ag lime. You cannot put less and get away with it and still have the same results that you would have by putting the 2,000 pounds of the 70% CCE ag lime out of your quarry. It all boils down to that CCE. It's very, very important, and it's something that many food plotters have really never even heard of. When I talk to food plotters about this, and when I'm talking about CCE, you can tell that the vast majority have never heard of CCE. They have no idea what it is. And so it's very, very important in when you're trying to find a liming agent for your property. Liquid lime calcium carbonate is such a small particle because it's so fine that what you're generally going to see is a real quick spike in the soil pH. It's not going to go up super high, but you're going to get a quick spike and a real quick fall back down. Okay, right back to where your normal soil pH is. And that's because of those very, very small particles that react very quickly, but they can't change that soil pH over a longer period of time because of the small particles. Okay, ag lime is our next product. And ag lime is built in small and large particles. And I know anybody who's spread ag lime, you think, no, that's small. It almost comes out as a dust. And it does, but there's also a lot of very small dust particles in there, and there's also some large particles in there. The thing about ag lime is, because of all these different particle sizes in that agricultural lime, you have some reaction to those hydrogen ions very quickly with the small particles. And then you have your medium particles that are going to maybe start reacting in a year or two. And then you have your large particles that might take 2 or 3 years to really start breaking down. So generally what you get when you're spreading ag lime is, on a scale, you kind of have a very gradual increase to raise your soil pH, and it stays up for quite some time, and then a very gradual decrease. And that's because of these different sizes that are in that liming material. That's why you don't see that reaction with the liquid, because it is all small particles. It lacks any of the large particles to be able to have that reaction over a longer period of time. Ag lime is 100% the cheapest option, no question about it. The last time I ordered ag lime, I got a triaxle load, which is 24 tons, I believe, and I got it for about around $500. The problem with ag lime is it's a pain in the butt to spread. The machines that actually spread ag lime in the agricultural industry are belt driven on the bottom, and they have very steep slopes on the outside. So basically what happens, anybody who's ever spread ag lime, you know that it hollows out. You wouldn't believe that ag lime would be able to hollow out like that. And you can put it in a cone spreader behind a tractor or behind a UTV. If you've ever put it into a fertilizer spreader, God help your soul, because I know how big of a pain that was. But I have spread this stuff many a times, and there's not a great way of doing it other than having a very high dollar lime spreader that you buy that's built specifically for lime. And even with those, if the lime gets wet on you and starts to cake, it's a very big pain in the hind end to use these products. So you're much better off when you're spreading lime to spread with a cone spreader, if you don't have a lime spreader that's available to you, you can spread this with a cone spreader. But the key is here is you spread small quantities at a time. The more you pack in, the more pounds you try to get in that hopper, the harder it's going to be to spread. And I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, because there's nothing about ag lime that's easy. It's a pain all the way through. But I had about a 3/4 acre field of alfalfa. It had about a 5.7 pH. And if you know anything about alfalfa, the soil pH must be right at 7. If you don't get it at 7, you can expect that your alfalfa is not going to last long, and you're going to have a lot of trouble with toxicity from it. So I went out and I bought a 23, 24 ton triaxle load of lime and trucked it in. Actually dumped it right next to the plot. Worked out really, really handy. And as I started spreading, I was shoveling this lime into a cone spreader that goes on the back of a tractor. And as I started spreading this, I was having more and more and more trouble as I went. And I'm like, man, this is such a pain. There's got to be an easier way. Well, what I learned eventually from that was, when I very first started, lime's very heavy. So you get a shovel full of it and you put it in there, and you might have just put 10 or 15 pounds in there. And to anything else, you would think, well, I need a whole bunch of these shovels to fill this cone spreader up. If you ever got the cone spreader full, it would obviously spread for a few minutes, and then it would hollow out at the bottom. And so then you were tapping on it with the side with the hammer, trying to get it to drop. And eventually it would drop a little, and then it would hollow again, and drop a little, hollow again. It was really frustrating. But what I found out through liming that field, after filling the hopper up 3 or 4 times, I started not putting nearly as much in there. Or instead of putting, say, 500 or 600 pounds in that cone spreader, I might put 150 or 200. Now, obviously, I had to do more stops and more fill-ups. But what I found was, when you didn't have that extra weight in there, it really didn't pack in there nearly as bad, and you didn't have nearly the trouble with getting it to come out when you weren't overpacking it. So that's just a quick tip for you guys, if that's something that you're interested in, and you go ahead and try to get a lime spreader and try to spread it with your cone spreader on your tractor. More is not better when you're trying to do that. So I would rather use small amounts and it flow out, and then have to go over there and put 5 or 6 more shovels in and then go again, as I would fill that cone spreader with 30 scoops of your shovel, and then 3 minutes later you're hollowed out and you're off the tractors. So it will really test your Christianity if you've ever spread ag lime. It will 100% test your Christianity and see how good a mouth that you have on you. So our last product is pelletized lime. It's the easiest to spread, no question about it, but it's also the most expensive. And basically what pelletized lime is, it has a binding agent in it that makes these pellets that are all the same size. So essentially what you have is you have the entire bag is literally the exact same size. So when you spread this in a field, generally what happens with pelleted lime is you're going to see a pretty quick upbeat in your soil pH. And then you're going to see that it doesn't hang on super long at the top once it gets to 6.5 or 7, and it starts dropping pretty fast again. So what I like to recommend on pelletized lime is putting about 500 to 700 pounds per year. It's something that to me is fairly easily done. You put that in your cone spreader with your tractor, and you can spread that easy. And anything that you have that's a spreader will spread pelleted lime. So I've got one on my Can-Am that I have. I've got a little spreader for that, and it is a really, really good little unit. It has spread thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of pelleted lime through it. Now, it will not spread ag lime. I have tried that many times, and it will not spread ag lime. The sides are just not steep enough to get that lime to fall down in through there. But it will spread pelleted lime very easily. And so what I like to do is put 500 to 700 pounds an acre, and then check my soil pH yearly and see if I'm holding or if I'm gaining. This is a real test on food plotters, because what it does is you really want to be able to look back and say, okay, I added 500 pounds pelleted lime. The following year, my soil pH increased by 0.2 or 0.3. And And so you continue doing that over the years, and you'll see that increase or a decrease. And so you may want to add a little bit more or a little bit less to that. But with pelleted lime, and my thoughts on pelleted lime are it's more of a quick term, short term fix, right? It's not going to be that long term deal like ag lime because it doesn't have those large particles to really change that soil pH over a long period of time. It's something that is going to change it fast, and it's going to drop pretty fast as well. So when we used to raise a bunch of high value crops here in Western Kentucky, one of our main cash crops was tobacco. And so as we were raising dark fire tobacco, you would go out and pull your soil samples, ideally in the fall, and then if they needed liming, you would put the lime on. Well, when you couldn't get the lime on that fall, say because it was too wet or for whatever reason you couldn't get the spreader out there, we would use the following spring when they were putting our fertilizer down, our nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, we would put 500 to 700 pounds of pelleted lime in there because it would take care of that year's crop. Now, it's not going to completely change it from a 5.0 to a 7.0 in 1 year, but it's going to give you a pretty quick boost. And the most accurate way to take these soil samples in these plots is to take a wide swath and go through the field. And say you have a 2-acre field, you should be taking 4 or 5 samples at a minimum. And then what you do is you take them all at the same depth, and then you mix all those together. And that kind of gives you an average to go off the entire field, rather than just going out and taking one sample. Then you may have hit that high pH spot or that low pH spot, and it's requiring 1,000 pounds of lime per acre, or it's not requiring anything. And in a lot of these places that we know that our soil is acidic, and so I find it best to take 4 or 5 samples per acre and mix all those together. And I think that gives you the best case scenario of what soil pH is in that field with having all that mixed together. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you found this podcast helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. Check out my website, www.diyfoodplotpro, and go check out my YouTube channel for more great content. Until next time, keep on food plotting. God bless y'all.